All right, let's get you up to speed with the latest in the Israel-Hamas war. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior government leaders on Friday to reaffirm America's support. He's in Israel to show solidarity and pledge ironclad support, and again compared Hamas to the terrorist organization ISIS.
As the U.S. Secretary of Defense, I am here in person to make something crystal clear. America's support for Israel is ironclad, and I extend my deepest condolences to the Israeli people for those killed or wounded in this terrible slaughter by Hamas.
Austin, who was sharing the stage with Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, said that the U.S., quote, will make sure Israel will have what it needs to defend itself. He also stressed that this is no time for neutrality, and America was behind its ally Israel in its war on terror.
There is never any justification for terrorism, and that's especially true after this rampage by Hamas. And anyone who wants lasting peace and security for this region must condemn and isolate Hamas. Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian people or their legitimate hopes for dignity, security, and statehood and peace alongside Israel.
Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the Netanyahu government has asked 1.1 million Palestinians to evacuate northern Gaza in the next 24 hours, even as casualties on both sides have crossed the 2,800 mark. Palestinians fear it could be a precursor to a planned Israeli ground offensive. Hamas, however, has called on people in Gaza to stay home and ignore Israeli evacuation orders. Following the orders, the UN said the mass relocation of the entire population in northern Gaza to the south of the enclave was quote-unquote impossible, as the information came shortly before midnight and urgently appealed for the order to be rescinded. Amid an intensified Israeli siege cutting off water, food, and power, and a sudden new assault, conditions look worse than at any point since Palestinian refugees flocked to Gaza during the 1948 fighting when Israel was founded. The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza is the only passage in and out of the coastal enclave, not controlled by Israel. And on Thursday, Egypt's president stated Gazans must stay steadfast and remain on their land. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said the case of Gazans is different because their displacement would mean the elimination of the Palestinian cause. Thousands of leaflets which read, "Evacuate your homes immediately," have been dropped over Gaza by the Israeli military. Against the backdrop of this warning, Hamas has urged residents to not leave their homes, but some residents have started fleeing to the south. Israeli army says Hamas militants are hiding in tunnels located beneath the buildings populated by civilians. Tensions are flaring up in Israel's north flank area as well, where Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah has launched attacks on Israel, which in turn has received retaliatory strikes from Israel as well. Iran's foreign ministry reportedly met the foreign minister of the country reportedly met the head of Hezbollah. Iran says Israel's action in the Gaza Strip could receive a response from Iran's allies, while Hezbollah says that it's fully prepared to join Hamas when the time is right. Iran further says the United States must rein in Israel to avoid a regional spillover of the war. Listen in to our correspondent, Gadi Francis.
So in this part of the world, in Lebanon, when we're speaking about Hezbollah, when we say Hezbollah and Israel are at war, it is not something new. It is actually relative. They haven't been at peace, but they haven't had a full-blown war since 2006. Tit-for-tat attacks, drone attacks, assassinations have always been here. Every year, every month actually. So what is happening now at the borders is not considered a full-blown war, and yet it can be something else. Is it really going to become a full-blown war? And if so, If more than 15 years ago Hezbollah was able to preserve its land on Lebanon, what would a future war between Hezbollah and Israel be like?
On the battlefront, both sides continue to engage in warfare. On Friday, multiple rockets were launched from Gaza into Israeli territory. Over 3,200 have been injured in Israel. On the Gaza Strip, the situation remains dire. United Nations World Food Program says critical supplies have been running out dangerously low in the city. It could soon run out of food, water, and medicines. The only power plant has already stopped working. More than 6,000 have been wounded in the region. Israeli tanks from the south could be seen firing into Gaza, while Israeli warplanes continue to pound the region. With regard to the hostage crisis, as Israel says over 150 hostages remain with militants, Hamas says at least 13 Israeli and foreign national hostages held have been killed in the past 24 hours. Hamas had earlier warned that every targeting of our people without warning will be met with the execution of one of the civilian hostages. As the war escalates, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing heat in the domestic sphere. Recent poll shows Israelis blame Prime Minister Netanyahu for the Hamas incursion into Israeli territory and brutal attacks. Our correspondent Jody Cohen has sent us a report on what's happening in Gaza with regard to Israel's order to evacuate the northern part. Take a listen.
In terms of what to expect going forwards, I think the warning was given by Israel to the Gazan civilians to move to safer ground just before midnight last night. They said that they were giving a 24-hour warning, so we can expect potentially something to happen after midnight on Friday night, perhaps in the early hours of Saturday. Now, we also know that Israel has got its defense forces on the border with Gaza in the south, and also in response to those rockets on the border with southern Lebanon because of the fire that's coming from Hezbollah there too. And we know that there are countries around the world who are trying to put pressure on Hezbollah not to join in the fighting as well. So Hamas has called Friday a day of rage and called on its followers to fight Israeli security in Jerusalem. In China, an Israeli diplomat in Beijing has been stabbed, and they're looking into whether or not that was a terror attack. And meanwhile, have advised the Chabad house, which is a Jewish house in Beijing, to close. In the UK, some Jewish schools also have closed out of safety fears for the children. Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been in Jordan today for meetings with King Abdullah and Palestinian Authority President Abbas about the situation. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the German Foreign Minister, and European Commission President have they're all in Israel to bear witness to the Hamas atrocities, with Lloyd Austin saying that Hamas's actions, he says, are worse than what he saw with ISIS.